The heat had stood over Greywater for 9 days without breaking, and the long drive up to the Grange shimmered like water that was not there. Linnet Marrow was on her knees in the physic garden, cutting feverfew before the sun could draw the oil out of it, when she heard the horses. Not the easy trot of an expected guest. A hard, punishing gallop, the kind a man used only when whatever waited behind him or ahead of him was worse than a broken-winded team. She was on her feet before she had decided to be. The carriage came through the gatehouse too fast, slewed on the gravel, and stopped crooked before the steps. A great black traveling coach dust to the window glass, a crest on the door she did not know. Grooms and outriders spilled around it, all shouting at once. And through the shouting came a sound that put every other thing out of Linnet's head. A thin, high, whistling gasp. The sound of a child struggling for a breath that would not quite come. She began to run. A man already had the boy in his arms, half falling down the carriage step. He was tall and dark and travel-filthy, hatless, and his face was the face of a man watching the one thing he knew he could not survive. Do something, he was saying, to no one and to everyone. You will do something. I command it. A physician in black fumbled the lancet with shaking hands and reached for the child's bared arm. No. The word came out of Linnet quietly, and it stopped the whole forecourt, the way a quiet word will sometimes, when 100 loud ones have failed. She was already among them. Not one drop of blood. He has none to spare, and it is not blood that ails him. She laid her 2 hands on the child, a boy of 6 or 7, his lips gone pale and his breath caught fast in his throat, and everything in her went still and certain at once. Blah. Lay him down, here, on the flags. The stone is cool. Loose his collar. The rest of you back. Give him the very air you are standing in. They did not move. A duke's people do not take their orders from a woman in a garden apron with green on her hands. Back, she said again, no louder, only lower, and something under the word did what her small size could not, and the wall of them gave way. The boy's throat had swelled from the inside until the passage was nearly shut. She had seen it twice before, and once she had not been in time, and the memory of that made her hands very calm. She tipped his head, cleared his mouth with a gentle finger, and turned him half onto his side so that what little air there was could find a road. "Triggerth," she called without looking up. The steam kettle off the still room hob and the blue bottle on the second shelf, the small one. Run, don't walk. Then she bent low over the ruined little face and did the thing she always did, the only prayer she had ever trusted. Slow, now, she murmured, for him and no one else. The body remembers how to live. It only wants reminding. You are not going anywhere today. The old gardener was quicker than his 60 years. The kettle came and the blue bottle. She made a tent of her own apron and the rising steam and set the boy to breathe it. She wet his lips with 3 drops from the bottle and not a drop more, and then she waited. 1 minute. 2. The forecourt did not breathe with him. And then, under her hands, the small chest hitched and caught and hauled in one long, whooping, furious breath, and then another, and the color came creeping slowly back into his lips. The child began weakly and in outrage to cry. It was the most beautiful sound Linnet had heard in a year. The tall man had gone down onto his knees on the gravel without appearing to know that he had done it. He watched his son breathe as though he had never understood what breathing was. And when at last he raised his eyes to the small brown woman kneeling over the boy, hair come down about her face, hands still circling on the child's back, there was something naked in his face that a man of his rank had surely not let anyone see in a very long time. "Who are you?" he said. "Linnet Marrow, your grace. I keep the physic garden here." She had never seen him before, but a man did not ride behind a crested door and command the open air unless he were a grace at the least. He looked at his son. He looked at her hands. And then he came to a decision, the way such men come to all their decisions, completely, and without troubling to consult a single other person alive. "She is coming with me," he said. He did not say it to Linnet. He said it to the physician, to the grooms, to the house itself, and the hard white sky above it, in the flat and absolute voice of a man who had bought and shifted whole counties and had never once in his life been told no. "Whatever she is, paid here, I will treble it. Have her things packed. My son does not leave her sight again." Behind him, old Tregarth, who had carried steam kettles at Greywater for 50 years, and knew better than any man living what these gardens could and could not save, said nothing. But he looked at the Duke, and he looked at Linnet, and there rose in him a thing he could not say aloud to a great man in his first hour under their roof. He thought, in 6 years, that woman has not once set foot across the Kelder Bridge. Not for the fair, nor the market, nor the burying of the one friend she had left in the world. He had watched her walk down to the very foot of it 100 times and turn back gray and shaking as though the far bank were the sheer edge of the earth. She would sooner lie down and die than cross that water. And the Duke of Aldermere had just promised a whole forecourt of witnesses that he would carry her over it by nightfall. Linnet, still kneeling with the breathing child, had not yet heard him. When at last the words reached her, when they caught her up and she understood them, the color that had held so steady through all the dying drained straight out of her face. Linnet had come to Greywater at 17, and, in those days, she had meant to go everywhere. She came with her sister, Sorrel, 2 orphaned girls taken in for the garden and the stillroom, and for 4 good years the pair of them had the run of the whole Green Valley. Then, the summer Linnet was 21. The fever came up the water. For weeks she was the only trained pair of hands for 6 miles. Night after night she crossed the Kelder Bridge into the town to sit with the dying, and every dawn she crossed back again to her own work. On the worst of those nights a hard berth called her over the river and would not wait, and Sorrel, who swore she was only a little sick, who was lying, begged her to go, because the strangers had no one and she had Linnet always. So Linnet went. She saved the mother, she saved the child, and she came back over the bridge at first light to find that Sorrel had died alone in the dark 3 fields away, while she knelt in a stranger's cottage earning nothing but their gratitude. She never crossed the Kelder Bridge again. 6. She let the world call it grief, and let it think her strange, and told the true reason to no one, that beyond that bridge lay the one country where she had chosen strangers over her own blood, and she no longer trusted herself to choose again. Within Greywater's walls, she could save 100 lives and risk nothing that was hers to lose. And now a duke had promised 40 witnesses that he would carry her over that water by dark. The trouble was that Greywater itself was dying, and Linnet was the only soul there who had let herself see how. It was a beautiful place, which was the whole pity of it, a long gray house set above its own valley, famous once for a physic garden that had sent its remedies into 3 counties. But a great house is like a body. It sickens first where no one troubles to look. The far orchards had gone to canker. The tenant roofs let the weather in. The still-room stores that had been the estate's quiet pride went out the back gate by the cartload, and the money for them turned up in no book Linnet was allowed to open. Greywater belonged to Lady Morwenna Ashfin, who was 84 and had buried 2 husbands and every child she had ever borne. Once she had been the sharpest woman in the valley. Now, on her good mornings, she knew Linnet at a glance and quoted her Latin at the roses. On her bad ones she called her Sorrel, and asked when the girls were coming down to breakfast, and Linnet learned to answer her without letting her voice give way. The old woman's mind had begun, very gently, to loosen its hold on the world, and there was a man at Greywater who had waited a long and patient time for exactly that. His name was Mr. Sowerby. He had come as the estate's agent the same winter her ladyship's memory first slipped, and by soft degrees he had made himself the one person who held the keys, kept the accounts, paid the tradesmen, and carried her ladyship's own seal in his waistcoat pocket. He was a lean, dry, courteous man, who never raised his voice and never quite met your eye, and he settled every question in the same level tone, as though to disagree were a small ignorance he was too well bred to name. He signed his name to a failing estate, and year upon year, unaccountably, he prospered. Linnet had seen all of it, and said nothing to anyone, because a woman with a secret of her own does not go prying into the secrets of other people, and because Mr. Braun, Sowerby, on the single occasion their eyes had met across an emptied storeroom, had smiled at her with great gentleness and said only, "You keep to your garden, Miss Marrow. It is what you are good at." It had sounded precisely like the kindness it was not, so she kept to her garden. She had kept her head down for 6 long years, and she had meant to keep it down for 6 more. She had not once counted on the Duke of Aldermere driving a dying child through the gatehouse and deciding, in the space of a single held breath, that her long quiet was over. The Duke's men were already in the still-room, wrapping her jars in straw, when Linnet found her voice. "Put those down," she said. "I am not going." The Duke of Aldermere turned to look at her as though a chair had spoken. He had the look of a man who had not been refused since he was breeched. "You mistake me," he said, not unkindly, the way one corrects a child. "I am not asking whether it suits you. My son will die without you. You will come to Aldermere, you will keep him alive, and you will be rich for it. There is nothing here to discuss." "There is one thing," Linnet said. "I cannot leave Greywater. Cannot." He tried the word as though it did not fit his mouth. "You are not bound here. You are the paid servant of a garden. I have already trebled. I have not stepped past these walls in 6 years, your grace." She said it plainly, and watched the plainness of it stop him. "Not to the town, not to the fair, not 1 pace across the Kelder Bridge. I do not ask you to understand it. I do not understand it myself, in any way I could write down. But if you put me in that coach and drive me at the water, you will reach Aldermere with a woman of no use to anyone, and your son will have lost his nurse for nothing. That is the truth, and I am sorry for it, and it does not change." For a long moment the two of them stood in the ruin of the half-packed still-room, the great man and the small woman, and neither gave an inch. It was the boy's own weakness that settled it. The physician in black was brought to admit that the child could not be carried a mile in such a state, let alone 40. He would not survive the road, and the one woman who could keep him would not take the road at all. Into that deadlock on the arm of her maid came Lady Morwenna Ashfin. It was one of her clear mornings, and on her clear mornings 84 years fell off her like a drop shawl. She looked the Duke of Aldermere up and down with the unhurried insolence of a woman who had been bowed to by his grandfather. And she said, "You are making a great deal of noise in my house, young man, over the one sensible creature in it. Sit down. Your son may have my east rooms. They take the morning sun, and a sick child should wake to light. You may have whatever you are able to pay for, which I imagine is a very great deal. And Marrow," the bright old eyes came round, "stays precisely where she is." The Duke, to the astonishment of his own people, bowed. Great men know their own kind, and he had just met a will older and harder than his own. When he had gone up to his son, Lady Morwenna kept Linnet a moment. She reached out one knotted hand and closed it, with surprising strength, about Linnet's wrist. "Now hear me while I am here to say it," she said low and quick, "for you know as well as I that I am not always here." Her eyes were terribly clear. "You have hidden in my garden 6 years, child, and I have let you, because you saved what could be saved, and asked me for nothing. But that man will not go away, and his grief has teeth, and this house—" She stopped, and something crossed her face that was not confusion, but its very opposite, a dreadful clarity. "This house is no longer what it was, and we both know why, and I can no longer trust my own hand to sign what is laid before it. So I shall do the one thing I still can. From today, the sick room is yours, and the still room, and the stores, and the ordering of anything at all the child requires. On my authority, which in this valley is still worth more than any man's paper. Take it, while I have the wits to give it. Your ladyship, Linnet began, and the old woman cut her off. Do not thank me. I am not being kind. I am being desperate, and there is a great difference between the two. There is a man under this roof who has been waiting a long while for me to forget my own name for good. You have a clever eye, Marrow. I have watched you turn it on my roses. It is time you turned it on my account before I forget I ever asked you to. And then, as simply as a candle gutters in a draught, the clearness went out of her. The bright eyes clouded, and she looked at Linnet with a mild, polite puzzlement, and said, Are you the new girl? Run and tell my sorrel the light is going. She does so hate to be late down to her supper. The boy was called Tobin, and for 3 days he lived on the very edge of the world. Linnet did not leave him. She had a truckle bed carried into the sunlit east room and slept, when she slept at all, with her hand laid flat on his chest so that any change in his breathing would wake her before her own mind did. She fed him a spoonful at a time, thin barley water, then broth with an egg beaten through it, drawing the strength back into him the way you draw a flame from a single coal, patiently, giving it only ever as much as it could take. She held the swelling down with her steam and her draughts. She held the fever back with cool cloths and cooler patience. And on the 4th morning Tobin opened his eyes, considered the strange woman who smelled of green things, and demanded, in the imperious little voice of a boy who is one day going to be a duke, to know whether she was a witch. Very nearly, said Linnet. Drink this. He drank it. From that hour he was hers. He mended slowly, and as he mended, he trailed after her authority like a duckling after the first thing it sees. He wanted the name of every plant. He wanted to know why feverfew and not comfrey, and what lived in the blue bottle, and whether she had ever in her life cured a dragon. She answered him as she answered everyone, plainly and without flattery, and the plainness of it worked on the lonely, motherless child like rain on a parched field. For the boy had no mother. Linnet learned it in pieces from the maids and from Tobin himself. The Duchess of Aldermere, Rosamund her name had died of this very wasting fever when the boy was 2, and the Duke had never taken another wife, and had raised his only heir in a great cold house among 40 servants and no warmth at all. He had carried the child the whole length of the country to Greywater because a groom's wife had once spoken of a healer beyond the Kelder who did what the London men could not. It had been the last desperate throw of a man with nothing further to lose. He had not expected it to answer. What he had not expected, above all, was that he would find he could not leave. The Duke of Aldermere stayed at Greywater through all that green summer, and told himself each week that he stayed only for his son. He was a man built for command and starved, of the single thing command could not purchase, and he did not know what to do with his hours. So he watched. He watched the small brown woman move through the sick room, and then through the house, and he watched what became of the house as she moved through it. For a house, as Linnet had always known, is like a body. You cannot set your hand to mend the one part without the whole of it answering. She had begun with the boy's food, and the boy's food had led her down to the kitchen, and the kitchen was a disgrace. Mrs. Cobe the cook wept the first time Linnet came down bearing her new authority, certain she was to be turned off. When she understood instead that here at last was someone who would let her send back the rancid butter and the weevilled flour that Mr. Domley, Sowerby, had bidden her make do with, she cooked as though the jail door had swung open. The stores that had been going so quietly out the back gate began, just as quietly, to stay. Linnet turned out the still room, and found 3 years of good physic gone to ruin for want of a hand to turn it. She set it right. She had the sick child's linen washed and sweetened, And then, because the body does nothing by halves, the whole house's linen after it. The maids, who had long since learned to be invisible, found themselves seen instead, and thanked, and asked their names. Within a fortnight they were carrying their small troubles to Linnet rather than swallowing them whole, and old Tregarth, who trusted almost no living soul, had begun to bring her the house's larger troubles too, the ones he had once carried uselessly to a fading old woman's door. By midsummer, the servants had left off saying, "Mr. Ball," Sowerby says, as the last word upon everything, and taken to saying, "Best ask Miss Marrow." And that small change in the grammar of the house was, though not a soul said it aloud, a kind of quiet revolution, word of its spread, as word of a healer will. By July the sick of the district had begun to come again to the Greywater Gate, as they had in the old days, on foot and on farm carts, and Linnet went out to them in the forecourt, never a step beyond it, and sent them home mended. Sowerby did not care for it. Every soul she treated at that gate was a soul who would speak her name in the town, and a man who robs a house in the dark has no love of anything that lights a lamp in it. He said nothing to her face. He only watched her now with the same level, lidless attention he gave his ledgers, and once, passing her in the passage, remarked in his mild way that her ladyship's charity was a fine thing, so long as it did not grow beyond what the estate could bear. Linnet heard the whole of the threat folded neatly inside the courtesy, and thanked him for his concern, and did not stop. We'll pause the story here for just a moment. If it has taken hold of you and you would like to see how it ends, do take a second to subscribe. It costs you nothing, it helps the channel more than you know, and it means the rest of Linnet's story will find its way to you. The Duke saw all of it, and did not know what to make of the discovery that his own frozen heart had begun, by the smallest degrees, to thaw in the warmth of a house that a garden woman was quietly raising from the dead. He fell into the way of coming to the east room in the evenings to sit beside his sleeping son, and Linnet would be there mending or grinding herbs by the last of the light, and they would talk. Or rather, she would answer, and he would find himself telling her things, of Rosamund, of the great silent house at Aldermere, of the particular loneliness of a man whom everyone obeys and no one loves. There was a dry, buried humor in him under all the grief, and now and then she startled it loose, and each time it happened he looked faintly amazed, like a man who has heard a clock chime in a house he had believed stood empty. Once, and only once, he asked her about the bridge. "They tell me," he said carefully, not looking at her, "that you have not crossed the river in 6 years, that you turned back at the water's edge." He turned the question gently in his hands, the way she had watched him turn his sleeping boy, a woman who will walk into a dying child without one breath of fear, afraid of a bridge. "I own, I cannot make the sum come right." "Then we are square, your grace," said Linnet lightly, "for there is a great deal in you I cannot make come right either." And she bent again to her mortar, and he understood, being no fool, that a door had been shut very courteously in his face, and he let it be. But he did not stop wondering. And she saw that he did not stop, and it frightened her worse than the bridge did, for a man who wonders is a man who looks, and she had spent 6 years taking the greatest care that no one looked. There was one more thing the sick room had handed her that she had never gone seeking. Figures: to feed a sick child and mend a house you must draw stores, and to draw stores you must know what the house buys and what it pays. Linnet had a good eye and a far better memory, and within a month of keeping her own small book of what came in at the kitchen door, she had seen that her figures and Mr. Sowerby's would not agree, not by a little. The house paid, upon his books, near twice what the tradesmen at the door would swear they were ever paid. She said nothing. She was long and terribly practiced at saying nothing. But the figures lodged in her like a splinter under the skin, and would not be still, and she knew, the way she always knew a thing well before she was ready to know it, that sooner or later she was going to have to look in the one place she had promised herself she never would. The chance came in August, on the day Mr. Sowerby rode into the county town for the quarter's business and left his office locked behind him. It ought to have stopped her. It did not. The old physic ledgers were kept in the estate office, upon the shelf that backed against the still-room wall, and between the two rooms stood a door that Sowerby kept locked and that Tregarth, who had picked the locks of that house as a barefoot boy, could open with a bent nail and a clear conscience. Linnet told herself she wanted only the old still-room accounts to learn what the garden had once been worth. That was true. It was not the whole of it. The office was a cold, orderly room that smelled of ink and sealing wax. She found the old ledgers where she had supposed they would be. And she found, because she had the kind of eye that cannot help itself, the things she had not come for. There were 2 account books for the running of the estate, where there should have been one. The first was the fair book, the one that would be shown. The second lay in a locked drawer whose key hung, brazen, on the same ring as the first. And the second book was the truth. Higher rents truly gathered, stores truly sold, timber felled and never once entered. The gap between them widened year upon year, and every shilling of it vanished into a place the honest book was careful never to name. But it was the third thing that stopped the breath in her throat. Beneath the books lay a flat japanned box, and within the box a sheaf of drawn deeds, and upon the deeds, again and again, Lady Morwenna Ashfin's seal. Conveyances, transfers. Field by field, and farm by farm, the estate signed quietly over into the hands of a trading company whose name meant nothing at all, until Linnet found, on the last and largest of the papers, the name of its sole proprietor set fair, Josiah Sowerby. And every deed was dated. Linnet knew those dates. She had kept a nurse's diary of her patients, and Lady Morwenna was, in her way, a patient, and against each of those dates, in her own plain hand, she had written that her ladyship had not known the month, nor the year, nor the faces of the people who loved her. This was no steward skimming a kitchen book. This was a man lifting a whole estate out of the hands of an old woman, by the one means she could no longer defend against her own name, set to paper on the days her mind had gone wandering. Linnet stood in the cold office with the proof of it in her 2 hands, and understood that she was no longer a woman who could keep to her garden. Then she heard the outer gate, and hoofs on the gravel far too soon, and, rising up clear through the still evening, the smooth and level voice of Mr. Sowerby in the yard. Linnet had the japanned box open in her 2 hands in no time at all. She did the only thing there was to do. She laid the deeds back exactly as she had found them, corner square to corner, the books upon them, the drawer turned to, and she was through the connecting door and back among the still-room shelves, a jar of dried yarrow in her hand and a slate propped before her, when Mr. Sowerby came in from the yard with the dust of the road still on his coat. He stopped in the doorway between the 2 rooms. He looked at her, and then he looked at the door. She had come through, and something moved behind his pale eyes, and was gone before it could be named. "You are working late, Miss Merrow. The child's fever wants yarrow, and yarrow wants weighing." She did not look up from the slate. "I did not think the hour mattered so long as the work was done." "No." He came a step into the still room soft-footed, for so dry a man. "The hour never troubles the diligent. It is only the door that troubles me. I keep that door locked. Do you? Tregarth had it open to sweep the flue this morning. You had best take it up with him." She set down the yarrow and met his gaze then, plainly. "Was there something you wanted, Mr. Sowerby? I have a sick child upstairs." For a moment they measured one another in the failing light, and Linnet saw, beneath the smooth gray courtesy, the thing she had glimpsed once before and not understood. He was afraid, not of discovery in the common way of her. A man who works in the dark cannot abide a lamp, and Linnet had become, without ever meaning to, a lamp. He smiled. "A word only, from one servant to another. This is an old house, and it has kept its own arrangements a long while. and it does not care to be disturbed. A woman with no people and no place of her own does best to keep to the work she is good at and to leave the rest be. Healers pass through a house like this, Miss Marrow. They are wanted, and then, quite suddenly, they are not. I should be sorry to see you found unnecessary before you were ready for it." "How kind of you to be sorry," said Linnet. "Good night, Mr. Sowerby." She walked out past him with her slate, and her hand stayed steady until she reached the dark turn of the stair, and there they began to shake, and she did not go to the Duke. She told herself her reasons, and one of them was plain fear. To go to the Duke was to be looked at, and behind her lay a name and a bridge and a night she had told to no one living. Sowerby held every key and the ear of a fading old woman, against a nurse with a stolen glimpse and no paper of her own. He had only to smile and murmur of hysteria, and she would be turned off with a bad name inside the week, and the road out of Greywater ran across the bridge she could not cross. Better to keep her head down as she had for 6 years, so she said nothing, and a part of her she did not much like knew that this silence, unlike all the others, was a kind of theft of its own. The thing that broke her at last was a baby at the gate. She came out on a gray morning to the small knot of the sick who waited there, never past the forecourt, never a single step, and among them stood a girl of perhaps 19 with an infant on her hip, both of them thin in a way that had nothing to do with any illness. The child had a croup. Linnet could ease in an afternoon. It was the mother she found she could not mend. She was called Nan Threlfall, and she had been born on Greywater land, and she told her small history without one word of blame, which was the worst of it. Her people had held the same 3 fields for 4 generations. 2 winters back the rent had gone up, and up again the winter after, until there was no bearing it, and at Michaelmas, Mr. Sowerby had turned them off the land as gently and as finally as a man closing a book. They had gone to her husband's brother's cottage, 6 souls to a room, and her grandmother, old Bridie, who had steeped Greywater's own herbs by the estate's own charity for 30 years, had taken a chill in the moving, and no physic had been sent that winter for Mr. Prest. Sowerby had stopped the charity as an expense the estate could no longer carry. Old Bridie had died in February of a thing that Linnet, with the very stores that had been rotting in her still room 3 miles off, could have turned in a week. "I don't say it against her ladyship, mind," Nan added quickly, jogging the fretful baby. "Her ladyship's a saint. The whole valley knows it. It's only the hard times, and Mr. Sowerby does what he must, I don't doubt. I only ever wished," and she stopped and looked down at her child and did not finish, because a woman who has nothing left cannot afford to wish out loud. Linnet dosed the baby and filled the girl's apron with what would keep it well and sent her home, and then she stood a long while in the empty forecourt in the gray morning light, and she was ashamed. For there it was, the whole of it, laid bare in one thin girl. Sowerby had never needed to be clever. He had needed only to be patient and to build his theft upon the plain decency of other people, upon a grieving man who would not open his own accounts, upon an old woman whose mind had loosed its hold on the world, upon tenants too loyal to blame him and too poor to fight him, upon a nurse too frightened for her own skin to speak. Every soul in it was being good, and a house of good, patient, uncomplaining people could be emptied to the bare walls, courteously, and would go on thanking the man who emptied it, until one single person was at last willing to stop being quiet. She thought of old Bridie, dead of a chill, while the cure to save her went to mold 3 miles away. She thought of the deeds in the Japan box, and the dates set against them, and Lady Moore went on what might have been the last clear morning of her life, asking Linnet to turn her clever eye upon the accounts before she forgot she had ever asked. She went in, and washed the gate dust from her hands, and made up her mind she could not go to the Duke with a story. A story Sowerby would drown in his mild and reasonable voice. He would call her overwrought, a nurse grown above her station, and the Duke, who was half in the way of believing her now, but only half, and who had a steward's long service laid on the other side of the scale, might well be brought to doubt. She needed the thing itself. She needed the two books set side by side, and the deeds with their damning dates, and the diary in her own hand that gave those dates their meaning, and the tenants' own voices, and the tradesmen's own tallies, the whole quiet architecture of it built up so high and so plain that no smile on earth could talk it down. She needed for the first time in 6 years to stop hiding and to let herself be seen. She began that same night. By the turn of high summer the boy Tobin was well, and more than well. He was a wholly different creature from the pale, half-smothered child that had been carried up the grey water steps in June. He ran now on brown legs, trailing a crop of questions and a passion for the physic garden that Linnet, who had loved it alone for 6 years, found, to her own surprise, that she did not mind sharing. He called her Linnet, having been bidden a dozen times to say Miss Marrow, and forgetting it a dozen times on purpose, and in the sudden, whole-hearted way of a child long starved of it, he had come to love her. His father had arrived at the same place, by a slower and far more frightened road. The Duke of Aldemere had never been taught how to love a thing easily. He had loved his wife and buried her. He had loved his son, and had come within one breath of burying him too. And he had learned from both that to love a thing is to hand the world a knife and show it plainly where you are softest. So he said nothing of what was happening to him. But it happened all the same, across that long green summer, in 100 small, unguarded moments, when Linnet lifted his sleeping son without waking him, when she surprised one of his dry, rusted jokes into the light, when he came on her at dusk in the garden with the low sun in her plain brown hair and understood, with a lurch like a mist stare in the dark, that the great cold house waiting for him at Aldermere had come to mean less to him than this borrowed one. One evening late, he found her in the still room over a single candle, bent close above a small book, writing. She shut it too quickly. He saw that she shut it too quickly, and he was too courteous, or too careful, to ask. Instead, he leaned in the doorway, a big man made almost gentle by the dark, and said, "You carry something, Linnet. I have watched you carry it since the first hour. The way a woman carries a brimming cup across a crowded room, all her care bent on not letting it spill. I will not ask you what it is. I only tell you that I have a broad back, and it has been idle a long while, and it is entirely at your service, should the cup ever grow too heavy to hold alone." For one perilous moment she very nearly told him. The whole of it rose in her throat at once, sorrel and the bridge, and the Japan box and the dates. It would have been such a relief, such an unspeakable relief to set it down. But to set it down was to be seen, wholly, and at once, and she was not ready, and neither, she judged, watching the careful hope in his hard face, was he. So she gave him a true thing that was not the whole thing. "I had a sister," she said. "I lost her. I keep her account still, in a manner of speaking. It is an old habit and a private one, and it is kind of you not to ask after it." "Ah," said the Duke, and did not ask. But something eased in him, to have been trusted with even so small a truth, and something eased in her to have said Sorrel's name aloud to another living soul after 6 years of silence. And they stood a moment in the candlelight, each holding one corner of a thing that neither would yet lay upon the table, and it was, though neither of them named it so, a kind of tenderness. There was another thing the summer had done, quietly, while no one owned to watching it. The three of them had become, in every way but the saying of it, a small family. They dined at the shortened table, the Duke and the boy, and the nurse, who was not quite a servant and not quite anything else the county had a word for, and more than once of an evening, the Duke had come to the edge of saying a thing that would change everything, and had drawn back from it, not from want of feeling, but because a man does not offer a woman a life at Aldermere without first asking her to leave the very ground she stands on. And some deep instinct in him had learned to tread softly near the question of her leaving. He did not know why she could not cross the bridge. He only knew that the one time he had come near it, a door had closed in his face, and that whatever waited behind that door was the same weight she carried across the crowded room, brimming, spilling for no one. It was the boy who said aloud the thing none of the grown people would touch. One evening, drowsy by the fire with his head in Lynette's lap, while she teased the burrs from his hair, Tobin asked, in the plain and terrible way of children, whether she would be his mother now, for his own had gone to heaven before he was old enough to keep her face. The room went very still. Lynette's hands did not falter in his hair, for a healer learns early never to let her hands give her away. But she felt the Duke go rigid in the chair across the hearth. "You have a mother," she said gently. "She loved you before ever you were born, and that kind of love does not stop only because a person is out of sight." "But she isn't here," said Tobin, with a child's flat and unanswerable logic. "And you are." There was no reply to that which was at once true and kind, so Lynette only bent and kissed the crown of his head, and did not look at the Duke, and the Duke did not look at her, and the two of them sat a long while gazing into the fire, at the very same impossible thing, a family that had grown up around them without anyone's leave, because the woman at the heart of it could not so much as walk out her own front gate. She built her case at night. She did it the only way she trusted, quietly in her own hand, a single proven figure at a time. She could not get into the office again, for Sowerby kept it locked now and watched her. But she found she had no need of the office. She built the truth from the outside in, from the doors and the tally sticks, and the plain word of honest people. She got the butcher's own reckoning, and the chandler's, and the corn factor's, under the fair pretext of settling the kitchen herself. She had Nan, Threlfall, and two other turned-off tenants set their marks to a plain statement of the rents they had truly paid. She wrote it all out fair, and kept the growing bundle, where no maid would think to look, and no steward would dare to search, sewn into the lining of an old gray cloak that hung, unregarded, on the back of her own door, and each night she added to it what the day had brought her. It was slow work, and frightening work, done behind a bolted door by a single flame, for she had understood from the very first that half a case is worse than none at all. A rumor Sowerby could smile into nothing, but a ledger he could not. And then, in the last week of July, Aldermere came to Greywater, in the person of Mrs. Ottilie Vane. She arrived unannounced, in a hired chaise, with a great deal of luggage, and the settled composure of a woman who means to stay. She was the late Duchess's elder sister, Rosamund's sister, and since Rosamund had died, she had made herself the mistress of the Duke's great house in all but name. She ordered his servants, planned his table, and had half raised his motherless boy. She had 100 a year of her own and a widow's narrow dignity, and the running of Aldermere was the whole of her place in the world. Word had come to her at last that the Duke had buried himself a whole summer in a strange house in the north, in thrall to some garden woman who had cured the child, and Ottilie Vane, who had learned long ago exactly how thin the ice lay beneath a poor relation's feet, had come north to measure the danger for herself. She measured it inside an hour. She saw the shortened family table, and the thriving boy, and the small brown nobody at the very center of it all, to whom the servants deferred and the master's eyes kept turning. She was a good deal cleverer than Sowerby, and she did not smile and threaten. She watched. "Marrow," she said, 2 days on, over Lady Morwenna's tea, turning the name upon her tongue like a stone she had not yet decided whether to keep, an unusual name, and from nowhere in particular I collect, no people, no place. How very unencumbered you must be. The smile was cool and exact. "My cousin the Duke tells me you cured Tobin when the London men had given him over for dead. That is no small thing. One does wonder what a woman of such gifts is doing, hidden away in a physic garden at the edge of the world tending another woman's roses. One wonders what it is she is hidden from." "Oh, the same things as everyone, I expect, ma'am," said Linnet mildly. "Hard work and bad weather. No." Ottilie set down her cup. "I have learned to watch, Miss Marrow. When a woman is left with nothing in the world but a chair at another woman's table watching, is how she keeps the chair. My sister used to laugh at me for it. She is dead, and I am still here, and I still have my chair, and I mean to keep it. So I watch. And I have watched you 2 days, and I will tell you what I see. I see a woman who never once leaves these walls. Not to the town, not to the church, not across that little bridge the servants whisper of. A woman who has made herself needful to a grieving man and his only son, and who will not say where she came from." She rose, gathering her shawl. "It is a very pretty piece of work. I confess I only ask myself what it is for." And Linnet, meeting the bright, hard, frightened eyes, understood that here was the true danger, not the soft-spoken steward with his ledgers, but this. Sowerby wanted only to keep his theft in the dark. This woman wanted the light, and she had come armed with the one weapon Linnet had spent 6 whole years taking apart. She meant to find out who Linnet was. She set to it at once. She rode away south. There was, among her few surviving connections, a cousin married to a small-town solicitor, and she set him to making the soft, roundabout sort of inquiry such men make, whether anyone in that far fever country recalled a healer by the name of Marrow, and a death 6 years gone, and a young woman who had left her people under the shadow of it. It would take weeks, but it would come. Nor did it escape Mrs. Vane, in those first watchful days, that the estate's own agent, a lean, courteous man named Sowerby, who never quite met the eye, disliked the garden nurse quite as thoroughly as she did, and for reasons of his own that he did not name. They fell into talk, the two of them, in the long gallery. The way two people will when they have discovered they are aimed at the very same door. Neither said aloud what they wanted. Neither had any need to. "She is not what she pretends," said Ottilie. "No," said Mr. Sowerby, with great gentleness, "and she has lately been where she had no business to be between us. Vane, I fancy we might see her safely on her way before she contrives to do the same for us." The blow fell on a bright morning at the beginning of September, and it fell as such blows do all at once, and from more than one direction. Mrs. Vane's letter had come back from the south. And Mr. Four. Sowerby, who missed very little, had marked the healer's new errands. The tradesmen sought out, the turned-off tenants visited, the small book carried always close, and understood as a thief understands the tread of the law upon the stair, that the quiet woman was no longer merely watching. She was building. He did not know how much she had. He knew only that a man in his position does not wait to be shown. He strikes first, and loudly, and lets the noise do the work of the truth. So he chose his ground. He chose the great hall on a morning when the Duke was in it, and Mrs. Day. Vane and half the household passing on its errands, and Lady Morwenna herself sat by the window in her chair with a shawl, the color of ash, one of her clouded mornings, when she smiled upon the room, and knew not a soul in it. He chose, that is to say, an audience, and he came before the Duke of Aldermere with sorrow, written across the whole of his mild grey face. "Your Grace," he said, "it grieves me past telling to bring you this. Your nurse, Miss Marrow, has broken the lock of my office, and gone through the estate's private papers in the dark, and has been about the county these 3 weeks turning the tenants against their own steward. I have given this house my life, sir. I will not stand silent while a woman of no name and no history who wormed her way up out of a garden into your Grace's trust strips me of my good character to cover. I dare not think what design of her own." The hall had gone, very quiet. And into that quiet stepped Mrs. Ottilie Vane, a folded letter in her hand, and a great sorrowing gentleness upon her face. "Cousin," she said softly, "I should be false to poor Rosamond's memory if I held my tongue. I made inquiries for your protection, and for Tobin's, nothing more. Ask yourself why a woman of such gifts should hide at the world's end and refuse to cross a common bridge. The answer is here in my hand. 6 years since, she was a healer in a fever country to the south, and one night, with her own young sister lying sick and crying out for her, she chose to cross the river to a stranger's house instead, and while she was gone, that sister died, alone, in the dark. And Linnet Marrow fled the shame of it and buried herself here, and has never since found the courage to cross that water again. The gentle voice never rose. That is your son's nurse, cousin, a woman who left her own blood to die alone. Is that a woman to be trusted with the last child you have left? Every face in the hall turned to Linnet. And the Duke of Aldermere looked at her the way he had looked at her in the very first hour, before ever he knew her, closed, and drawing back, a door swinging quietly shut behind his eyes. She watched him weigh it. She watched the terrible logic of it settle upon a father who had already buried one wife and come within a breath of burying his boy. A woman who abandons the dying, a woman with a hidden name and a hidden reason and a locked book she had shut too fast. She watched him begin, against everything the summer had built between them, to believe it. And Linnet found, standing in the bright hall with every eye upon her, that the fear had simply gone out of her. It was the strangest thing. For 6 years she had braced against exactly this, had shaped the whole of her small hidden life, to be certain it never came. And now that it had come, in a crowded room with her worst secret said aloud, she felt only the great level quiet that came over her hands above a dying child. There was nothing left in her to guard. That was very nearly a kind of freedom. She has told you the truth, Linnet said, so plainly that the whole room leaned in to catch it, every word of it. I am Linnet Marrow. 6 years ago my sister Sorrel lay sick, and a hard birth called me across the Kelder in the night, and Sorrel, who was dying, though I would not let myself know it, bade me go, because the strangers had no one, and she had me always. So I went. I saved the mother, and I saved the child, and I came home at first light to find my sister dead. I have not crossed that bridge since. Mrs. Vane has it exactly right, and she has left out only one thing, that there is no punishment she could devise for me that I have not already served upon myself every day for 6 years. She turned from Audley to the Duke, and she looked at no one but him now. You may believe what you please of me, your grace, but before you settle it, you had best hear the rest, for these two, in their haste to be rid of me, have told you one true thing in order to hide a far greater one. She drew from beneath her apron the paper she had carried folded there since dawn, for she had known, watching Sowerby this last week, that the morning was coming. I did break the lock of that office. I will answer for it to any magistrate you name, and here is what lay behind it. She laid it out in the plain, unhurried voice she used above a sickbed. 2 account books, where there should be but one, a fair copy for the showing, and a true one, locked away, in which the rents ran higher, and the stores went out the back gate, and the timber fell, and was never entered. And beneath them, in a flat japanned box, a sheaf of deeds conveying Greywater, field by field into a company owned by a single man, Josiah Sowerby, each deed sealed with Lady Morwenna's own seal, and each dated to a day upon which, by Linnet's own nurse's diary, faithfully kept these 3 years. Her ladyship had not known the month, nor the year, nor the faces of the people who loved her. He has not been robbing a kitchen, your grace, Linnet said. He has been stealing a whole estate out of the hands of an old woman on the days her mind had gone wandering. Widow Bridie died last winter of a chill because he had stopped the physic to hide the cost of it. And he and Mrs. Vane would see me gone this very morning because I am the one soul left under this roof who has looked and written it down and will not be quiet about it. For one heartbeat, no one in the hall stirred. Then Mr. Dewar. Sowerby made his one mistake. This is the raving of a hysterical woman, he said, but he said it a shade too quickly, and his hand had already gone out, quite without his leave, toward the papers in Linnet's grip, reaching to take them. And every soul in that hall saw the reach and understood it. A man does not snatch at a lie. The Duke of Aldermere had stopped looking at Linnet as at a stranger. He was looking at her now the way a man looks at solid ground after a long time at sea. "Bring it here," he said, "all of it." The proving of it filled what was left of that day, and ran on long past midnight. The Duke sent for the true book and the japanned box, and Sowerby, who had no way now to keep his keys from a duke, surrendered them with his smooth face gone the color of cold tallow. Tregarth was sent to fetch the tradesmen, and they came in their good coats, awkward in so grand a room, and one after another set their own tally sticks against Linnet's fair copies, and swore the figures were honest. The butcher, the chandler, the corn factor, and the carrier from the town who had been paid, on paper, for a physic charity that had not left the still room in 2 whole years. Nan Threlfall came and stood before the Duke of Aldermere with her chin up, and told the plain tale of old Bridie to his face, and did not weep, which was a great deal harder to sit through than weeping. And the Duke laid the 2 account books open side by side, and turned the deeds over one at a time against the small worn diary in Linnet's hand, and he understood the whole of it very quickly, for grief had at least taught him how to read a hard thing once he had made himself look at it. When he had done, he sat a long moment, with his hand flat upon the deeds, upon the seal of an old woman who dozed by the window and did not know her own house was being handed back to her. Then he raised his head, and the fog of grief that had hung upon him for 6 years had burned clean away, and what was left underneath was cold and wide awake and terrible. "You took a helpless woman's name," he said to Sowerby, "and set it to paper on the days God had taken her wits, and sold her own fields out from under her into your own hand. You let a good old woman die of a chill to save the price of the medicine that would have kept her. There is a word in the law for what you have done, and you will hear it read from the bench at the county assizes, and I will be in the room when you do." He did not raise his voice. If anything, it dropped to something level and without any bottom to it. "Every key you hold, you will give up tonight. You will be off this land within the hour, and every figure this lady has gathered will travel to the magistrate ahead of you. What you have taken, you will pay back to the last shilling, and what you cannot pay, you will answer for as such men answer." There was, in the end, nothing left for Sowerby to do. At the door he paused and looked back at Linnet, and the mildness had slid off him like a shed coat, and the face beneath it had never once been mild. "You could not keep to your garden," he said. "No," said Linnet. "It was never in me to—" "Good night, Mr. Sowerby." When the door had shut behind him, the great hall stood silent, and there remained only Mrs. Vane. Through the whole long reckoning she had sat unmoving by the cold hearth, the ruined letter forgotten in her lap, watching the things she had thrown in her lot with come to pieces in the candlelight. Now she rose. She was handsome still and straight back still, and she staked her last coin the way only the truly desperate do, all of it at once, and looking you dead in the eye. "You will want me gone by morning, I imagine," she said to the Duke, the devoted aunt who wished nothing but to keep your boy safe. "And where am I to go, cousin? I have a widow's pittance and a widow's cap, and not one roof in this world that is my own. I was married off at 19 to a man twice my years, and I nursed him, and I buried him, and all it bought me was the freedom to sit at the far end of other people's tables and be grateful for the chair." The bright voice thinned and thinned as she spoke. Rosamond was the one thing that was ever truly mine, and when the fever took her I lost my sister and my whole place in the world inside a single week. So I made myself useful in her house, and I guarded that usefulness like a starving dog with one bone, because it was the only thing I had left. You look at me as though I were some monster. I am not a monster, cousin. I am afraid. I have been afraid so long, I have forgotten the shape of anything else, and I am so very tired of it. though I do not suppose a man who has never once wondered where he would sleep can know what that word costs to say. And there it was, at last, the plain, frightened creature under all that polished hardness, laid bare in the falling light. The Duke's jaw had set like stone. He drew breath to answer, and Linnet saw that the answer was going to be a just one, and that justice here meant the finish of the woman cast out, talked over in every parlor in the county, left to grow old on her pittance with no door open to her anywhere on earth. "Your Grace," said Linnet, "let me." He turned to her, and whatever was in her face made him close his mouth and give a single nod. Linnet went and stood before the proud, terrified woman who had that very morning tried to throw her to the dogs, and she felt no wish at all to gloat, for she had learned when she was young that triumph is precisely the thing a cruel person braces to meet, and that the one blow they have no guard against is the blow that never falls. "You watched a theft, and you warmed your hands at it," Linnet said, "and this morning you would have seen me ruined to keep your seat at this family's table. That is a mean and a wicked thing, and you know that it is, and so does His Grace. But you never once touched that seal. You never raised a widow's rent nor stopped a dying woman's physic. That was Sowerby's hand. Every bit of it, and none of it yours. You looked away and you kept your own small corner safe, which is the very thing I myself did under this roof for a whole summer while I knew what he was. I am the last woman living with any right to sit in judgment on you for it." She held the wet, furious eyes and would not let them fall. "You are that boy's aunt. You raised him when his own mother could not, and he loves you, and there is a place at his side that is yours by right, and that not one soul here wishes to take from you. Keep it. Be his aunt in the daylight honestly, and earn the chair instead of standing guard over it, and it is yours as long as you care to hold it, if His Grace is willing. You would owe that to no one, and least of all, to me." "I should like that clearly understood." Ottilie Vane only stared. She had steeled herself against contempt, against cold justice, against the open road. She had no armor at all against this, and it broke her where nothing harsher could have reached. Her fine face buckled once, and she mastered it, and held on. "Why," the word came out of her raw, with no grace left on it at all. "Because I know to the very bone," said Linnet, "what it is to be so afraid of losing your one safe corner that you would do a low thing to keep hold of it. I hid 6 years for that same fear, and because a house that has this night rid itself of one thief has no business making a homeless beggar of a frightened woman by way of marking the occasion. Good night, Mrs. Vane." And the Duke of Aldermere watched his son's nurse across the ruin of his own long refusal to see, and a thing in him that had been bolted fast for 6 hard years came open slowly, and not without pain. Autumn came gently down the valley that year, and Greywater, for the first time in a long time, was not afraid of the winter. The deeds went before the magistrate and were struck down for the forgeries. They were sealed as they had been by a hand the law agreed had not known what it signed. Field by field, the estate came home. The Threlfalls were back on their 3 fields before the first frost, and the Physic Charity ran again from a still room that no longer sent its stores out any back gate, and the rents came in fair and were set down, every one, in a single honest book kept in Linnet's own hand. What Sowerby had wrung from the tenants across 3 long years was reckoned to the shilling and paid back, cottage by cottage. And what could not be got from the man, for little enough was found on him in the end, the Duke of Aldermere made good out of his own purse and counted it, he said, cheaply bought. But a duke cannot stay forever in another house, and on a still evening near Michaelmas he came to find Linnet in the garden, and said the thing he had been circling all the summer long. "I have to go home," he said. "Tobin has a country to inherit, and I have neglected it disgracefully to sit in your still room and learn to be happy, which I had entirely forgotten how to do." He turned his hat in his big hands. This man whom whole counties obeyed, awkward as a boy at his first dance. The very first words I ever spoke of you, Linnet, I spoke as a command, to a forecourt full of strangers, without troubling to ask you a single thing. She is coming with me, I said, as though you were a mare I had taken a fancy to. I have learned better since. So, I will not command you. Now, I will not hand you into a coach and drive you at that bridge. I am only asking, will you marry me and be a mother to Tobin, who has chosen you as he has chosen no one, and to me who never looked to be chosen again by anybody at all? And if the answer is that you cannot cross the water, then I will find some way to make a life on this side of it, for I have discovered I would a great deal rather be a poor man in a garden with you than a duke in a cold house without you. And Linnet, who had not wept in 6 years, found that she could not answer him at all. It was Lady Morwenna who gave her the answer, 3 days later out of the last clear hour of her life. By then the old woman's mind came up only rarely, like the sun through a thick fog, and never for long. But on that grey morning she woke wholly herself, and she sent for Linnet, and took her hand in both her ruined ones, and called her for the first time in a year by her right name. "Linnet," she said, "sit down. There is a thing I have carried for you 6 years, and I have been so afraid I should die with it still locked up inside me. For my head is a sieve now, and I can feel the rest of it going." Her eyes were terribly, mercifully clear. "The night your sorrel died, you were across the water, saving that woman and her child. I sat with her. She was not alone, my dear, whatever you have told yourself in the dark all these years. She was not alone. I held her. And she was not afraid, and she was not sorry that she had sent you away. These were her words, near the very last, and I have kept them for you. Exactly. Tell Linnet I sent her over the bridge on purpose. Tell her I knew I could not be saved, and I would not have her sit and watch it. And tell her, this above everything, that if she makes my dying into a wall to shut herself behind, then I have carried her whole life off into the grave with me, and I did not love her to do that. Tell her to go on crossing bridges. Tell her when she is ready to cross back." The old woman's grip tightened once with the last of her strength. "I promised her I would tell you when you were ready. You were a very long time not ready. You are ready now. So I have kept my word to her. And now you may let me go." Linnet went down to the Kelder Bridge at first light. The next morning, she had walked to the foot of it 1,000 times in 6 years and turned back gray. She stood there now in the cold dawn with the river muttering to itself below, and the old iron dread came up in her exactly as it always had, and told her, as it always had, that the far bank was the sheer edge of the world, and that everything she loved died the moment she crossed. Her feet would not move. They had not moved in 6 years. And then a small, hot hand slid into hers. Tobin had come down after her, in his nightshirt and his boots, uninvited and entirely unafraid, because he was 6 years old and did not know that this was a mountain. "Are we going over?" he asked, already tugging, already half a step onto the first plank, chattering about the fish he intended to find on the other side. "And because you follow a child, because a child, hauling on your hand, does not grant you the dignity of your own terror." Linnet went, one plank, and then the next, the boy talking the whole way, and the Duke standing motionless at the far end, where he had waited out the whole black night, not calling to her, not commanding, only there. And she was across the Kelder Bridge and standing on the far bank, before her fear had finished telling her that she never could. She stood on the other side of the water for the first time in 6 years, and she came apart altogether, and the Duke of Aldermere gathered her into his arms and led her, while his son studied the river below and reported up to them with great satisfaction. When she could speak again, she drew back from him, there on the strange grass of the far bank, and looked up into the hard face, that was not hard any more. "You told me you would not command me," she said. "You told me the whole of it was mine to say." "It is," said the Duke. "It has been yours to say since the first hour. I have wanted only one thing in all this world, Linnet, and it was never obedience. It was to be the single soul in your life you were not afraid of. And Linnet, who had crossed the whole width of her fear that morning in 40 feet of old planking, found there was one small crossing left in her still, and she made it too. Then, yes, she said. Leander. She had never once in all that summer used his given name, and the sound of it on her mouth went through him like sunlight into a room that has stood shut for years. Yes, I will marry you and be a mother to your boy, and I will not spend one more day of my life on the safe side of anything at all. They were married that winter at the small-town church across the Kelder, where Sorrel lay. Linnet went first, and alone to the grave she had never once been able to stand beside. She had watched her sister buried, 6 years before, from the near bank of the river, too broken to cross even for that. And she knelt in the frost a long while, and told Sorrel a great many things, and came away from that churchyard, lighter than she had left any place in her whole life. Lady Morwenna did not see the wedding. She died in her chair, in the south parlor on a bright cold morning a fortnight before it, her mind gone soft as fallen snow at the very end, but her face at peace. A promise kept, and set down at last. That was the single loss no pudding right could reach, and Linnet did not insult it by pretending otherwise. There are griefs that are not to be cured, only carried, and carried gently. But the gray old house the old woman left behind her was full again and honest and warm. It passed to a distant cousin who was glad enough to let the new Duchess of Aldermere keep its garden alive from afar. Mrs. Ottilie Vane stayed. She did not turn gentle all at once. A woman does not unlearn 15 years of fear in a single season. But she came, in time to be Tobin's aunt in the daylight, and discovered she was a great deal better at the ordering of a large house than at the watching of other women for their faults. And the two of them reached, if never quite friendship, then the particular respect of people who both know to the bone how tiring it is to be afraid. They went home to Aldermere in the spring, all of them together, the Duke and Tobin and the new Duchess and Mrs. Twar Vane, who kept the place at the family side that Linnet had handed back to her that night in the hall. The house was exactly as the Duke had always described it, beautiful and cold, and half of it shut up under holland covers, with a walled garden behind it gone wholly to nettle and bramble, where the first Duchess had once grown her roses, and where no hand had touched the ground since she died. Linnet stood in the wreck of it on her first morning as its mistress, and looked at the choked beds the way she had once looked at a strangling child, and rolled her sleeves to the elbow. The old head gardener watched in open alarm as the Duchess of Aldermere knelt down in her good gown and set both bare hands into the cold earth. "It is only sleeping," she told him. "Fetch me a fork, and stop looking so stricken." By the turn of that first summer, the walls were greening over again, and the house was not cold in any room that mattered, and there was, quietly, and to the Duke's speechless joy, a second child on the way. And on a warm evening at the end of that first year, the Duke came looking for his wife, and found her, as he had half known he would, in the garden, with the low sun in her plain brown hair. "You have put the whole of Aldermere back on its feet," he said. "There is not a corner of the place left that wants rescuing. Whatever will you do with yourself now, Duchess?" And Linnet looked up at him calm and clear-eyed, and without one grain of fear in her. The very look she had turned on him from the hot, dusty gravel in the first hour of the first day, when he had wheeled round to his people and announced that she was coming with him, never once dreaming she had not set a foot across the river in years. "Oh, I shall find something," she said. "I always do. I cannot abide a thing left to die that a good pair of hands might save. It is the worst of my faults, and I have long since made my peace with it. The body remembers how to live, you know. It only ever wants reminding." She moved along the bench to make him a place. "Come and sit. You have stood watching from doorways quite long enough for one lifetime." She had given 6 years to the business of being safe, which is a very small thing to give a whole life to, and in all that guarded and hidden time, she had let no one truly look at her. She had crossed the water in the end, not driven to it, not ordered over it, but on her own 2 feet, a child's hand, in hers and her sister's blessing, folded into her pocket. And she had learned that the thing she had run from the whole length of her life had never been waiting on the far bank at all. To be wholly known by the one who loved her was not the ruin she had spent her days dreading. It was the solid ground. It had been standing there the entire time, on the far side of a bridge she might have crossed on any morning of those 6 years, while she stood shaking on the near side of it and called that shaking safety.